listening to Down in Bloomington, a conversational podcast about the musical history of Bloomington, Indiana. My guest for this episode is PJ Christie. I've known PJ Christie since the late 80s. We were teenagers hanging out in Broad Ripple. PJ was the bass player for a band called the Blacklisted. PJ was a member of the Gerunds. The Gerunds eventually evolved into a band called Sardina. After Sardina split up, PJ has gone on to play with so many bands with important ties to Bloomington, Indiana. He sits down with me today to tell me the story of his musical evolution, to talk about the bands that he's played with, and the projects that he currently works on. This was a really fun conversation, and I really enjoyed hearing PJ's recollections of Bloomington's music scene. I hope you enjoy my conversation with PJ Christie. But before we get into it, here's a live version of the song Antelopes.
Taking shade from the Manitou at the door, taking off his head, and inside his head is a letter that says, I love you. Sharper than razor blades, faster than
Hello, Mike.
Hey, PJ, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for making time to do this. This is awesome.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah. This is,
Dude, it's been so long.
I know, and this is exciting. Are you in Texas? Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in Austin.
I love it here. I love it here. We've been here for almost 15 years.
It might be, wow, probably close to 15 or 20 years since the last time I saw you in person, face to face.
It would have been, the last time we really hung out was when you were in Monkeyfish.
Yeah. I think we ran into each other at a Thai restaurant in Broad Ripple.
Yeah, we bumped into each other a little bit. But
Yeah.
the last time, the last time we got to talk about music and really like connect,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Which is like a good segue into like, my earliest recollections of you were as the bass player in Blacklisted.
That's right.
Yeah, and
We were on the label together.
that's right. We were. We were label mates.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But you were a big part of that Broad Ripple music scene. If I remember, you kind of like had a lot of musical projects going on in Broad Ripple.
Yeah, well, early Broad Ripple, or early in my career in Broad Ripple, like 88, 89, 90,
Mm-hmm.
there was a good, thriving punk rock scene.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the Blacklisted was part of it, and sort of Toxic Reasons and Zero Boys were the head of it.
Yeah.
And then everybody else was trying to be as cool as they were, really.
Do I remember?
We had our own young thing. We played at the Arlington and all kinds of all ages places.
Do I remember this correctly? Going to shows at maybe your parents' house?
Yeah.
Was that right? Like,
Well, we just needed gigs.
right. But it was on a golf course, right? Or
That's right. We did the golf course. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a couple of big shows there. My grandparents built the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom wanted to have a employee party. There was like 15 people that were there, and so she offered to pay the bands. And we had the Blacklisted, we had Acid Green, we had Bitch Head. I don't remember. We probably had you guys.
We didn't play, but I remember like just how the juxtaposition of the golf course and all the punk rock kids and Acid Green and Blacklisted. Yeah.
Bitch Head. Yeah. Well, one of the big concerts before that. That one wasn't a big concert, but there was a really good one called Freak Stock, which was out in Plainfield, and that's where I first saw Transgression and Modern Vending. There was just so many great bands coming out of Indianapolis, and then there was like an older group that was really like Right to Left and Mike's House and those guys, which were also really good, and they were informed by punk, but nobody would consider what Holger Boatman was really doing punk rock.
Right.
But all of my friends love the Boatman. I love the Boatman. They're one of my favorite all-time bands.
Right. Do you remember? And I still have a vinyl copy of it, but Black Brutal Frisbee. And
that was.
We traded that back and forth. I had like dubs of it. I even like when I would be like away working at summer camp, I would like make copies of that for people and like make sure it like ended up all over the country if I could.
So they could hear Jot and they could hear Sloppy Seconds and
Yeah. You moved to
Seats. Mm-hmm.
You moved to Bloomington in the 90s, right?
Well, I moved to Bloomington in 91. So I had taken a year off after high school. I graduated Lawrence North in 89. Go Wildcats. Mm-hmm. And I took a year off just to play music, and my family supported me doing that. That's when I moved out to the golf course and kind of got into the family business. Yeah. And through some really great things and some really hard things, as these kinds of moves are sometimes go. my girlfriend Marjorie and we moved down to Bloomington in 91. And that's when I started at IU. Yeah.
I remember running into you one time walking home from class, and you were living in like the Green Acres neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, West Campus. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And,
So the Gerunds would have been, I was living in Indianapolis.
Okay.
And in the timeline, a lot of really cool stuff started to happen in Indianapolis. And Jim Kuchkowski, I think it's where I really got to know Jim, was at Brand X. And so Brand X was going on downtown. It was like a performance space in a warehouse kind of thing.
Sunday night, right?
Yeah, it's Sunday nights. That's right. And so I would go down there, and so the Blacklisted was like, I guess that would have been around Rusty Cow era.
Yeah.
And so Blacklisted was winding down, and there were a lot of reasons for that. But I was without a band, and I didn't know really how to be in bands, and I didn't know how to leave a band. So the Blacklist was kind of fading away, and I started doing the MC at Brand X. And that's when I saw the Gerunds. So the Gerunds were already up and running as an acoustic trio when I met them. And then I joined up and convinced them to be a rock band. And that was in like 90 probably.
Yeah.
And then the Gerunds were kind of back and forth between Bloomington and Indianapolis over the next, 3 years. But all my first shows in Bloomington were with the Gerunds, or the Wild Corn Dogs with Jim Kuchkowski.
Well, do you remember? So one time, Monkeyfish and Blacklisted played a show at Varsity Villas in Bloomington.
Yes, we did. Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think we opened for you, and it was weird because it was like a bunch of bros, and like. And two bands that weren't really bro at all. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, Jack Hirsch always had a little bit of trouble fitting in with a rowdy audience. It seemed to me. I love Jack's drumming though.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to say now I sometimes get my stories mixed up, but I want to say that was a New Year's Eve show.
Huh.
And because we did Blacklisted did a New Year's Eve show, and I know Jim was there when. We counted down, or we were supposed to count down until midnight, and everybody was too fucked up. And so it was like 20 minutes after midnight, and we realized, nobody had their phones out, Right. And so we did the countdown like 20 minutes late. I know that was at the Varsity Villas. I
don't know if it was that show or not. I had a tendency back then not to be very conscious.
It's just a blur. So many of it. The stories, they become their own thing. You remember what you can, and you share them with somebody who kind of half remembers it too, and then the memories really take a life of their own. Yeah,
they do. So eventually, were the Gerunds pretty much a Bloomington band, or were they solely were they back and forth between Indianapolis and
so in the way that the Gerunds went, it was. The great John Seelingwalker was the drummer, and he actually moved down a couple months before I did.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived in a house with Frida's brother, and they had a baby, and that was John moved down first, really. Ultimately, John did. And then I moved down, and then Paul Couchy, the guitar player, moved down, and Kent, that was the lead guitar, he went to Art Institute. And so we would go, that's how we got started going up to Chicago for gigs. And then Michelle kind of split between Indianapolis and Bloomington, kind of depending on what was going on in her life. She lived there on Jefferson with us for a good long time. But yeah, over the that sort of early 90s, Michelle and I were back and forth a lot between Indy and Bloomington. So it's a gray area there.
Yeah.
We were pretty well established in Indianapolis when we moved down there. We had already played the Vogue. We had already played the Patio. But our first gig at the Bluebird was opening for the Blake Babies, and we were super excited about that show. Because the Blake Babies were actually somebody,
Mm-hmm.
And that was our first gig, and we played gigs opening for Vulgar Boatman and Arson Garden there in Bloomington that first year, and just trying to forge sound and get heard. We had made a cassette tape from Paul Mahern that opened up a lot of doors for us, and that was the 8th release that we had. So we kind of worked that in Bloomington and sold it at TD's and played at the Collins Cheshire Cafe and wherever we could.
What was the name of your release, the cassette?
It's called Our Son.
Okay, and there's a good write-up. I don't know. I was looking through some of the stuff on the internet, and somebody writes a pretty cool story about Our Son and about the transition from Gerunds to Sardina, which we'll hopefully get into in this conversation. But that core of the Gerunds was yourself, Michelle Marchessault, and was it John Seelingwalker and
Paul Cauchi was the acoustic guitar player, and he was from Broad Ripple. Yeah. And Kent Jolly was the lead guitar player, and he was from like Nora area in Indianapolis. And then after Our Son came out, we changed drummers. We changed from John Seelingwalker to Lon Paul Elrich, and of course he was in all those great bands in Indianapolis too, Tin Lounge and Din and so when we started playing with Lon Paul, the sound for the Gerunds began to just expand quite a bit. From like acoustic music to, it just brought in a lot more influences. And grunge was getting so big. I mean, no band wasn't touched by like just the desire to get louder. Yeah. We were all really into the Pixies, and we wanted to get louder. And other than having an acoustic guitar player in the band, there really wasn't anything to stop us. And so that's when you talk about that transition from the Gerunds, with what people think of like the quiet acoustic Gerunds, to becoming more of a wild band. A lot of that was Lon Paul, and a lot of it was moving from an acoustic guitar player to one electric guitar player. Yeah. Gave us a leaner sound, and we were just going nuts. I mean, with the creativity, it was a lot of fun.
When either in the Gerunds or Sardina, you all wrote an incredible volume of really good songs. Yeah. Were you writing together, or did somebody come with a completely written song that then the band fleshed out?
Both. There were a lot of songs that came out of jams. We were doing a lot of jamming, which is how the Blacklisted had always come up with material too. There usually someone would have a riff and you jam it out, and then before you know it, you'd have a song. I would say that in Sardina, a lot of in terms of volume, a lot of the music was like spontaneously jammed. But in terms of what people have heard through the records, in post years, it's probably half and half, I would say, honestly, where people would bring in a finished song. I didn't bring in a lot of finished songs. Michelle was more likely to, Lon Paul was more likely to, Marty was more likely to. Usually I was just kind of driving other people's ideas as much as I could. It's a great thing for a bass player to do.
It's my favorite thing about being a bass player is that I don't have to come up with a lot of ideas, but I can come up with a lot of creative ways to present those ideas.
And when you were like in the scene, were you ever faced with the ferocity of Lon Paul's drums, like to just really experience the creativity of his drums? It was so like it made the job so easy, because we could just say, okay, we're going to just switch from here into We Don't Know, and it would be automatically awesome just because the drums were always right there.
Right.
And Michelle and I had such a trust and chemistry because we had been jamming already for a long time. For her to be able to like improvise lyrics the way that she was, I mean, when a band can do that, it's like you just every time you play it feels like a new album, and that's largely how I think of Sardina.
Yeah, and it's when I think about that, I think about some of the times that I saw you all play in Bloomington, and I think probably I was catching kind of the a lot of the transition between Gerunds to Sardina. And I can't remember which band I saw, right? But I do remember that kind of ferocity of Lon Paul's drumming. And I remember kind of thinking about the engines that drive a band, and thinking about kind of how that dynamic expressed itself when you guys played live. I also remember thinking about that transition from kind of the more acoustic sound to the more electric sound. And I always thought it was really impressive the way that Michelle's voice made that transition as well.
Yeah. Say more about that. That's interesting perspective.
Well, I really remember like seeing a noticeable shift in the sound. Thinking about how versatile she was, or she probably is as a singer, and how that kind of bridged that transition between the softer acoustic stuff to this louder, more driven stuff. And it was pretty incredible to see.
She's truly incomparable. You know, the thing with Michelle, and I don't think, I'm just going to give my props to her because I love her so much, you know, but she was kind of a student of the theater in a way. Her mom used to work at Beef and Boards in Indianapolis, booking all the acts. And so she had already seen like B.B. King 5 times and The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And, you know, Beef and Boards in Indianapolis was a weird little theater. They would have all kinds of stuff through there. And she had for being a mostly punk kid in the new wave when I met her, she had a lot of depth in terms of the music that she'd experienced. And she could sing blues, she could sing jazz, she could sing hardcore rock and roll, she could, sing a ballad. And but what impressed me there at Brand X, was the way that she could be in a room with stone floors and big walls and a big ceiling, totally fill that space with the achingly beautiful melody.
Really?
And and to see that, and then to see her like on stage when we opened up for live, which was probably one of the bigger stages that we've been on, to just see her again fill the room with personality and vocal. It's just she's incomparable. That's the word that I would use for Michelle's vocals.
I think that's well said. I really do. I want to talk about kind of some of the places and spaces that you played in Bloomington, being as this is kind of a podcast about Bloomington. But maybe you could tell me a little bit about some of your memories of playing in Bloomington and some of the experiences that you had there.
Yeah, well, I've so much enjoyed listening to the other people talk. I want to just piggyback on Night. What a fucking great thing Night was. Yeah. That was, I put a few like really weird things on stage at Night, and they always went over. They always went over well. Of my one venue that I really enjoyed a lot that I don't think people talk about very much was Courtney Kaiser booked. And then I can't remember the name of it. It was Rhinos at one point, and then it turned into a bar, and it was right on the square. And I think they had a downstairs lounge.
So I think you're talking about the Root Cellar?
Ice Housers. Root Cellar, was that it?
Was it right on the corner? Like the Comedy Attic is there now.
That's right. What was downstairs there?
The Bishop is below that, but there was a basement. There was like the Wild Beat, I think was the name of the place. And then...
Yeah, right? I remember the Wild Beat.
It wasn't the Root Cellar. Maybe it was the Cellar Lounge.
The Cellar Lounge, maybe, yeah. But Courtney booked that space. And that was a really good sounding room, I think, for everything that I wanted to do. Certainly every club has its unique sounds, but I thought that was the one where I felt like when I got up on stage there, I was really going to be able to hear everything. You can't say that about Second Story. Second Story, I loved it, but it had the mirrors up, and then it had that whole big blank section to the right where you'd lose all that sound.
Yeah,
it was kind of difficult as a performer at Second Story to find that spot on the stage where you felt like you could really like feel everything. And with Sardina, I mean, I definitely felt like I needed to feel everything, you know.
Right.
But Second Story had a really great stage, and I love the stage at the Bluebird. It actually had like a green room, which a lot of the clubs didn't really have. And Dwayne was always doing the sound over there. He was always really good. I remember a lot of the sound guys too, you know, Dwayne and Jake over at Second Story probably did down with those guys more than anybody.
Yeah.
I saw Vic Chestnut at the fucking Peanut Barrel, you know, like that was a life-changing show, seeing Vic Chestnut at the Peanut Barrel.
Sure. The Peanut Barrel hasn't been around for a long, long time, but I still have memories of like just that whole environment in there was so like unlike any, you know, it was dingy. It was at least my memories was it was kind of crusty and
yeah, it was totally divey. Yeah, it was like me and Paul from the Gerunds and like three bikers and Vic Chestnut on stage with the drummer and bass player playing the quietest music you could. It was of course, you know, really life changing and soul affirming to see a songwriter, you know, him faced with his physical challenges, just making like beautiful music. The all ages stuff though, you know, kind of back to what we were talking about with indie, because I had always really done a lot of like renegade shows growing up in Indianapolis for punk rock. It seemed like the first couple of years I was in Bloomington when I wasn't 21 yet, there was a lot of really cool all ages stuff going on, and there were basement parties all around. Second Fest had huge, you know, legendary basement parties. Not huge. Some of them were big. The one at Second Fest was a big one. Another one, Mitchell. There was one on Mitchell. Then for a while I lived at Smith and Grant. We would have big music parties. I lived with the Japanese Elephants over there, and we would have big music parties where everybody would jam. And there was just there was a great all ages thing. I loved how much music you could make there without it being bar focused, without it being, you know, cigarettes were in every bar. It was just, there was too much smoke in those scenes. But the basement scenes were always really cool. And what Brad Wilhelm did with Rhinos is like, you know, if there's a Mount Rushmore for the Bloomington music venues, Brad was such a welcome host for Sardina, you know, and everything I would do over the years. What's the status of Rhinos now? Is it still?
It does not exist.
No.
There is a venue in Bloomington called the Backspace Gallery, which is an art gallery. And the person who runs that is a person named Pixie. And, they used to book shows at Rhinos. And Pixie is working really hard to create an all ages space in the Backspace Gallery. As a matter of fact, November 15th, there's WFHB is doing a local live show for free admission, all ages, in the gallery. And
They're at the Backspace Gallery.
Yeah, and it's going to be hopefully something that continues to happen on a regular basis. And there are basement shows that are all ages. There are, but I mean, also being, you know, almost 55 years old, I'm a little bit removed from the all ages scene here in Bloomington. I've got a 14-year-old son who does not have a lot of interest in rock music or he's real into like 1930s jazz and
so eclectic.
He's not looking for live shows, which is kind of heartbreaking to me, but also like, you know, gotta let him do his thing. Rhinos doesn't exist. I think there's an opportunity, there's a space that could be created for that kind of all ages thing to happen. You know, I'm gonna sound like an old man right now, but part of it is getting kids away from their phones and their screens.
Yeah, it is. Enough
to have them venture out and engage.
Well, we had like, I mean, we're both throwbacks. You're 55, I'm 52, and if we wanted to go have fun, there was just a few places. I mean, in Broad Ripple, it would be the Drag. Spent a lot of nights on Broad Ripple Avenue. Yeah, watching the bands through the window at the patio. Yeah, I'm glad that Bloomington can do some all ages stuff, because it's really important in a town like that. It's really just all about the academic experience, but the social experience, and to like push everybody who's interested in rock and roll through the bar scene. There's just so much really great, interesting music that can be made outside of a bar scene. I mean, now, like, you don't drink and I don't drink. We've gotten so old that we can't sustain that anymore. Right. But yeah, it's I miss Bloomington a lot. I was last there, and I visited with Paul and Jennifer, and really just beautiful people. I've known Paul forever, and my grandfather had just died, and so Paul had some kind words for me. That was really cool.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Hey,
my dad's down that way. Yeah, let me just say, my dad's down that way too. So I want to try to get down there again soon. He's in Lake Cordray on the other side of the Hoosier National Forest.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm down that way most holidays.
That's not too far away at all. I wanted to talk a little bit about the recordings that you did with the Gerunds and with Sardina. A little bit about what that process was like, how you found yourselves in the studio, how you went about distributing your recordings, that kind of stuff. Yeah. It started with the Gerunds.
Yeah. So the Gerunds, we did we went to, gosh, I hope I get the details on this right. The way I remember it, we went to September Nights in Indianapolis and worked with somebody. It wasn't Paul. Somebody over there we worked with, and then we duped the cassette. We did a self-release cassette, and we duped that at Ahmet Cassette Services there on the east side of Indianapolis. And that guy was super cool. And it was a place you could walk in with a check and then come back 5 days later, and you would have 500 cassettes or something. So we went through a run of cassettes that way, and got a bunch of gigs, and got a guy to act as a manager for us, which was cool too. And then we went back, and then the second project we did with Paul was Our Son, and we recorded again at September Nights. And I'm pretty sure that was the first time I had worked with Jim as an engineer, because he was maybe an intern over there at the time. Maybe I got that wrong. But we did that with Paul, and again, self-released it on cassette. And it seemed to fit with the DIY model that I had always done in my punk rock days. We did cassettes in the Blacklisted, and then we continued to do it with the idea that vinyl was this when we get to do a vinyl, that's when it's going to be really cool, And so the Gerunds, that was the last one that we did, was and then we did a home recording thing after for super fans. And then when Sardina started, Jim Stouffer from Din had an 8-track unit at the place that him and Lon Paul shared on the east side of Indy. And so our first demos were there, and then that sounded pretty good, but not great. And so we went with Jim Kuchkowski and Chris Kress up to Mastrogini's studio called Sonic Iguana. And I had a big bass cabinet that I used for the Blacklisted that I didn't need anymore. It was like a big 410, 115 cabinet. And I sold that to finance the demos with Jim at Sonic Iguana. And from there, it was just like everybody loved the results. We did a single with Evan Finch's group. The Love Me Nots had a thing called Favorite Street Records. They released our first single, and then we just got a lot of attention. That's when the record companies really started to pay attention with the Sardina demos and the first single. And I James Combs was a big influence on the way that I saw things, and and John Strum too, in the way that I saw things, and neither of them recorded their albums in Indiana. And so I feel like with the offer to go up to Chicago and record and work with a different engineer, not, in Indianapolis, there were choices that you made to stay within the community, and Bloomington had their own community kind of based on Echo Park. And so when Sardina got our first bit of record label attention, it was Ken, and he wanted to come up and have us come up to Chicago and record. And we were just blown away at this beautiful studio, Chicago Recording Company. And we worked with this dude, Gus, he was like a house guy at RCA. So he worked with Lou Reed and Elvis Presley, and, like, he was probably the guy who walked out of the Lou Reed sessions. They were making too much noise. Gus was that kind of guy, I don't know that that's true, but Gus was cool, but he was a little older. Yeah. And then we cut, that's really so with the first thing, it was Monkey on Mars, Girl from Outer Space, Big Brother, Boo Child, Big Man, and San Francisco. A lot of people thought San Francisco was the best song. Monkey on Mars was the one that sounded the most like the Gerunds, and so that went on the single. And then when we recorded with Gus, it was like, that's when we first cut Liberty Horse. We first cut He's on Drugs Again. So we cut a version that we didn't use of Travel and Tourism that would be on the Presence album. And so it went well there with Gus. And so Ken then wanted to sign a record deal with us. And so he kind of got things out of order. Usually you sign the record deal and then you record the album. I think Ken's people wanted to make sure that it was going to be good before they actually committed to putting it out. And we had 3 weeks up there, at the Chicago Recording Company is a world-class recording studio. We cut right in between Smashing Pumpkins and Wilco.
Wow.
Yeah, same engineer, same board, same room, probably the same drum kit, Yeah. And yeah, it was really heady stuff. They had the big reverb plates in the basement with it used to be the Playboy building. So it was like a really cool building. And the reverb plates, we kind of just, when we talk about the Sardina like record Presence, which, I love it. I think it really turned out well, but it probably has too much reverb on it. But dude, if you had those big plates sitting in a basement and all you had to do was turn a knob and suddenly like the streets of Chicago come alive through these plates because it's like dense underground, you'd have used a lot of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when you're in the studio, oftentimes like you have all these new tricks and toys and you want to use them all. You want to like take advantage of every feature that this studio is affording you. So of course you want to like play with all of it, all of the knobs and dials.
Paul was a really creative dude, and Marty was a really creative dude, and we all like had a lot of ideas for putting stuff in, and we had the time to just like play. Yeah. Most albums are made like there's a gun pointed at your head, figuratively, to get it done as quick as possible, and every delay. And, a bass player's just got to be like, just like whatever's going on, it can't be the bass that messes it up, the bass and the drums has to be there. Yeah. And, but after my job was done, it was just like a playland of, there's pianos and organs and stuff laying around to pick up. And we would just be like making a noise in the control room, and someone would say, get out there and put it on the mic and let's do it. It was so when we made Presence, I think everybody knew that something big had just happened. Again, hearing your other interviews, I remember playing it for Glenn Hicks, and Glenn had this like white look on his face when I played Cock-a-Doodle-Doo, and he was like, there's a full second of delay on here. And I said, I know. And he's like, all right,
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was the summer him and Johnny kept the fire going in the backyard all summer when I went over there. And then, but while I was doing that, there was like delays. because you record an album like that, and then it's so much time before it comes out.
Right.
And that really ended up being the undoing of Sardina, because that's when Marty kind of lost interest, as we had like a gap where we weren't really doing anything interesting. He kind of, you know, felt like doing something else. And I started my own band. So this is my favorite experience, and I'll find the video for you. But it was summer of '95 in Bloomington. You know how slow things can be in the summer there.
Yeah.
And Michelle had mono coming off or she was ill with something. So we canceled a run of Sardina dates, which we had a date at Second Story booked. And so Sardina can't do it. They can't find anybody to take over. And so I just impromptu started a band with my friends, Dan Fierst and Greg Backus, and then our girlfriends. And we got together a band to play like one show at Second Story. And then the other band canceled. And so I wrote a musical, and then I brought in like a whole bunch of people to act out the parts of this musical. And Eric from Daisy Brain captured on video. And it's just weird, you know. It's just a weird thing that somehow I pulled off, and it isn't particularly great or anything like that. It's just hilarious that it got done, right?
Yeah.
That we put it on Second Story. That Eric was such a great chronicler of all those things from the scene. And that's probably my favorite memory was when I started my own band for one show, and you know, stepping out from the bass role and being the leader of a band, and then running that theater piece at Second Story in the summertime to like 15 people. Yeah,
I was not here summer of '95. I wish I would have seen that.
Oh God, it was fun. I'll find there's a YouTube of it.
Good, please send it to me. I wanted to pick back up the recordings that you did in Chicago. So that was kind of that summer of '95 was kind of the end of Sardina, or am I getting the time?
Well, it was the end of Marty's role in Sardina. Okay. So Marty was really key. I mean, when I talk about that Gerunds to Sardina transition, it was really built on Marty's guitar playing that we made that transition.
Yeah.
And he's a highly creative guy who wrote some of my favorite songs that anyone has ever written. Plus, Marty was an old friend of mine. He and I went to high school together, and he played drums in Bramble Grit. Bramble Grit probably played that show you were talking about out in the country, you know. Yeah. You know, like not be able to play with Marty was kind of a bummer. But we also we were really ambitious. You know, that's the other thing I would say is that although I loved Marty, I recognized that he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to try to be in the biggest band in the country, and we kind of did. So we wanted to move up to Chicago, and he just didn't want to. And somewhere in '95 then is when we moved up to Chicago and figured we would try to find another guitar player and you know, work up our new songs and tour and, you know, try to make another album. So we went through a string of guitar players to try to make that pivot. And I don't know, just didn't execute very well. You know, yeah. We used we auditioned a bunch of people, and we auditioned Chris Coopersmith, and him and Tina were playing in Fabric, I think at that point with Scott. And we really thought it would be cool if Chris and Tina joined Sardina. Mm-hmm. But they, you know, they had their reasons. I don't know what to say about it. You know, I mean, what I remember about it is people had a lot of difficulty with Longpole. I never had a lot of difficulty with him, but you know, he could be pretty difficult. You know, I certainly saw him attack people for no good reason. Although he just never did it with me. Yeah. He attacked my girlfriend, you know, for no good reason. So, you know, I saw him do it to people I care about. But I still think that would have been really cool to do it with Chris and Tina. And then we tried with this guy, Fred, who was in Philadelphia. He had spent some time in Indy working with Janice Hoyt from Boatman. and in like a pre-Mary Jane's, like a very early version of whatever that ended up becoming.
Yeah.
And so, but Fred had issues, you know, that we couldn't get around, drug issues we couldn't get around, and mental stability. So we sent him back to Philadelphia, and then we tried with Greg Backus. So Greg played in a bunch of Bloomington bands. He was in a band called Shine and Special Machines, and really creative dude, and had traveled with us before as like a roadie and played pretty mean guitar. So we tried with Greg, and then and got like a good set with Greg and toured, and then switched from Greg to Bill Cameron for about 3 months. And we were really on fire with Bill too. But, you know, by then it's like the relationship between me and Michelle and Lon Paul had kind of like, you know, each time we had to like go through that, you know, it's Marty, then is it Chris? It's not Chris. Is it Greg? Can't be Greg. You know, going through that, we're just like, oh God, just fuck it, you know? And Lon Paul got asked to join Mysteries of Life. And so he was like, gone, back to Indy. And I just stayed up in Chicago. You know, we, Sardina had publishing deal, and we had paid rent on a place for a year. And just because Michelle and Lon Paul didn't want to live there, I didn't have really anything else to do. So I stayed up in Chicago. And so, but you know, we did that. That was not the end of my Bloomington club experience. I was also in, sort of an honorary member of Stranded at the Drive-In. And that was that I really Chuck Gonzalez and I became really close friends. He lived in my neighborhood there when I worked with Eli, and I lived up in Cottage Grove. I became close friends with Chuck, and I joined Lessix Kid as a bass player, and then we saw Pat Spurgeon. I saw Pat Spurgeon at a gas station. I was like, dude, what's going on? He's like, I'm ready to play. He was in the Wombats. And, you know, but of course, Pat is, you know, one of the most incredible drummers. He had been through Steve Kowalski. He had been through Antenna with Strom. And then he just didn't have a gig. So him and I and Chuck got together, and we banged out as a 3-piece. And then Kenny joined, and then that's when they became Stranded at the Drive-In. And so I would come down from Chicago for gigs with them. I would build decks with my dad in Indy to make money, because I didn't have any money. And so I build a deck in a weekend and make $300, and then I'd go down to Bloomington and party my ass off with Chuck and Stranded at the Drive-In. And I had Juno 60. And so when they would play at Second Story, a lot of times I would bring my Juno and be like the noisemaker for them. Kept going down. I would record. I recorded at Farm Fresh with Jake one time. Did some solo stuff there. So I stayed in with Bloomington all the way through like 2000. In '98, I went back to finish school. Yeah. So I was there that whole summer of '98, and I was living with the Japanese Elephants, and had a little band called the New Bugs. But it wasn't really much of anything. But that summer in '98, actually, that I was in Bloomington, I saw a lot of shows and was really, again, like kind of immersed back into the scene. But because of my connection with Japanese Elephants. So, you know, my connection to Bloomington all the way through the '90s, basically, yeah. I was connected to it.
Let's fast forward a little bit and talk about any musical projects or musical adventures that you've been on post Bloomington.
Well, I mean, of the things that I did that I'm the most proud of, just in terms of like getting up there, I remember in Bloomington I saw Red Red Meat one time, and they just blew my mind. They were so good. And when I got to Chicago, I had occasion to join with Tim Rutilli in a post Red Red Meat project. It was sort of like a pre-Caliphone. It was sort of like, I mean, I just love Red Red Meat and Caliphone. And so playing with Tim Rutilli was super cool. We did a show at the Metro in Chicago where Quasi and Elliott Smith opened for us, which is pretty rad. And then in the 2000s, I joined up with Volker Boatman as their bass player. They were in sort of this in-between period. Jake had moved to England, Kenny was playing with them, and then took a pause for a while, and so I stepped into the bass role with the Vulgar Boatmen, which was a dream come true. I did maybe a dozen shows with them, and it was just like playing in that band was just so easy. Like I knew all the songs. I'd seen the Boatmen 60 times, you know. I knew all of Matt's leads. I knew all of Dale's, quirky things, and it was definitely the Boatmen were not at their peak of popularity. We had but we had a lot of really, really fun. The people who would come to a Boatman show, see them at Radio or something, were just so into it. And I really love those guys too. So that Dale was one of my favorite songwriters. Tim Rutilli is one of my favorite songwriters, and I have really just been about writing songs ever since. My thing, here I am. I'm 52. I've written like 200 songs in my life, and it feels really, really good.
Yeah.
Some of them in Bloomington. We had a group of people that were doing state songs. Me and Kenny and Josh Bennett. We're all writing state songs, and Chuck, and we tried to fill up all 50 states, and of course we couldn't, but the idea was like all of us were like really into writing. Kenny was really into writing, but hadn't done a lot of it, but you're just writing shitty stuff, just getting it out, just getting it out. So that was really fun.
Where can people find anything that you've written or recorded?
Oh, well, Musical Family Tree was largely built on Sardina. And so a lot of my back catalog is there, and a lot of the Sardina catalog and the Gerunds catalog. I just really, the story of my catalog being online in '98 as Sardina had kind of been wiped out, and everybody in the music industry was trying to figure out what's going on. And I was in Chicago, and I saw MP3 technology demoed there at Chicago Recording Company. It was me and Ken that was the producer, and Chris Shepard was the engineer. We were there, and they demonstrated how to take a CD and rip MP3s and post them on a server and then download them. And then all of us were like, well, that's the end of the music industry. You don't need to tour. You don't need a label. You don't need to manufacture. There's and I was excited by that. And so with interest in Sardina, but no platform for Sardina, I started operating as Admiral Sound, and I started posting Sardina MP3s on Admiral Sound, and that was the only way you could get them. Mm-hmm. And then in time, Amazon became a resource for people to be able to buy those CDs. But there was you just couldn't find that stuff anywhere, pretty quickly. And then Musical Family Tree was kind of based on the idea that with all, and also based on Eric's Bloomington timeline of bands, which is a whole show probably for you if you ever wanted to get into that. But the timeline of bands really indicated how much music was a shared interest, and that there was a community of people that had all played in bands together. They were all associated with each other. And so we started with Sardina and Long Paul's projects and my projects, and then we just began building out from there through the whole Indianapolis music scene and the Bloomington scene. And to get a lot of the early coverage that Musical Family Tree had was largely built on Sardina's connections. And I was excited, and I still love Musical Family Tree. I don't have anything bad to say about it. But as an early person, watching it become something else was a little bittersweet, I felt like I was in the DNA of it, and I don't feel like I'm in the DNA of it anymore. But all my archive is still there. I've begun to diversify my archive a little bit. I've got the Sardina Presence is on Spotify. I've got my first solo album is on Spotify. The Sardina single called Tractor Beam, which we recorded at the Lodge with Paul Mahern, is on Spotify and all the streaming platforms. But if you want the broadest archive of the Gerunds and Sardina and PJ Christie and Marty Green, Michelle and Long Paul's projects, they're all on Musical Family Tree. We did. There's a lot out there. I think for me, I did a release called Being Peter Christie, which is 7 songs And then I did a digital release called Everybody Wants to Be PJ Christie, which is like 50 songs.
Right on.
Like the whole everything. And there's cringy stuff on there, but you know, a lot of it, I mean, like there was a song on there that was recorded at Dan Fierce had bought a church and was remodeling it to apartments there on Cottage Grove. And I spent a summer working for Dan on that, and I recorded that in the sanctuary of the church. There's about probably 10 songs on there from that period, and I hear it, and it just brings back so many good memories, and I just keep it out there. Mostly, an archive is a personal, a personal expression, and but with Sardina, there was a real demand for it. You know, so many people over the years had said they wanted to be available, and I would be like, well, you can get it on Amazon for like a penny for a while. It would cost more to ship it than to buy it. And they're like, no, we don't want the CD. I was like, well, then the MP3s are there at Musical Family Tree. Well, no, I don't want to download it to my computer. I was like, what Sardina are you looking for? And then what they want is the vinyl.
Yeah.
They want the full vinyl experience, which they're not going to get. I'm not going to do it.
Right.
I would also love the full vinyl experience, but I do not have the $5,000 that it would take to pull it off.
Right.
Because we wouldn't want to half-ass it. You know, we'd want it to be. We've got the original artwork. Like, it could be done. It's not impossible to do. But you know, I put it on Spotify to be like, okay, we've got 35 monthly listeners. Now, does anybody feel like putting in $5,000? Because the data would say if they thought they could break even. I just don't. I mean, we sold 3,000 CDs.
Yeah.
I'm just going to brag on Sardina for a minute. We sold 3,000 Sardina CDs. Total failure for the record company. Amazing success for me and my dreams growing up playing punk rock at a golf course with a bunch of freaks.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I feel tremendously validated by the success that Sardina had. But I do not have an irrational imagination about what the finances of putting out a vinyl release would be. Fucking, this was what Lon Paul was supposed to be doing.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's a personal statement, and I don't mean to I do get emotional when I think about Lon Paul and like what's out there for Sardina to do. And he's the one who should be doing this, not me. Yeah. I have my own songs. Mm-hmm. And and I have my own memories and my own experiences, but
yeah,
it's tough loss. It's tough to lose a guy like him.
Yeah, his was a very tragic loss. A very, very tragic loss.
Yeah.
I think that though,
and we lost a lot of good people. Evan Farrell too, by the way.
Yeah.
I think of the two of them together as like, two people that really like carved a knife through Bloomington music to not be there anymore,
Truly. And it's to imagine what could have happened or could have. Mm-hmm. I try not to engage in kind of.
Yeah, I know. It's a fool's game, but talking to you has made me a little nostalgic, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what this is about. This is a nostalgia project. This is an attempt to keep the memories and to keep the music from that very special era of Bloomington alive. And I feel like it's really important to capture these and catalog these and talk about them. Sure. And
I'll tell you, listen to your stories. This is not a musical story, but Dee Hager, who I haven't talked to since he was my neighbor when I lived there on Lincoln. Yeah. But one night we were out there just raising all kinds of hell in the front yard. Me and my roommates. And Dee up his window, he yelled, "Hey, jackass, give it a rest."
Wait, what did he say?
Hey, jackass, give it a rest. And that has been my tagline every time somebody gets me out there.
I love it.
Yeah.
And he still performs with Brad Wilhelm.
Yeah, I got caught up on some of his recent recordings out there. It sounds really good. I mean, I love all these guys are still doing it. Kevin's doing it. His boy is doing it.
Yeah.
James Combs out there, you know, making some of the best work ever. In April too, you got Bill Cameron, you know, in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'm no different. You know, I'm just doing it in Austin. I have a current band. I have a package of current songs. I've been, you know, I've still been active in recording and you know, it's just it's so rewarding to hear the stories of people in their 50s that still kind of care about this great analog era and want to put the energy into, you know, keeping the flame alive.
Yeah, it's an amazing musical legacy, and I'm really grateful that I get the opportunity to talk to all of you and capture these stories. It's been fantastic.
And we have to capture the story then about you and the jazz bass for your listeners to make sure that people know about it. So first you tell the story of your side of the bass.
Well, so I had a Fender jazz bass that I bought in high school and probably paid $150 for it at Indiana Music Company. And it was an American-made jazz bass, and I sold it for beer money in like 1992. And it ended up, I think Jake Smith ended up owning it. He bought it from Roadworthy. It is my biggest musical financial regret ever that I let that thing slide through my hands. And you played it.
Well, so was that the same bass you played with Monkey Fish?
Yeah.
So the first time I played it was when I did Love and Touch and Squeeze In, when we played with Monkey Fish, because you were supposed to play bass on it.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and I don't remember what happened, but I know I really wanted to do it, and I know you really wanted to do it, and I remember you and I talking about we really wanted to do it, right?
Yeah. I think alcohol happened.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So that show was Monkey Fish and the Blacklisted and Steve Kowalski.
Yep.
And at the end of the night, everybody came up on stage, all the bands, and we did Journey's Love and Touch and Squeeze In live on stage at the Ritz/Arlington Theater there in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I played your bass.
Yeah.
And then after when I was going back up to record at Sonic Iguana with Sardina, I had two basses. I had a Rickenbacker bass and I had a Fender Precision Light bass with active pickups. So these were my two basses. And Jim Kuchikowski was like, "No, you're going to play this one." And the bass that he gave me to play was what I knew to be Jake Smith's bass.
Yeah.
So Jake somehow ended up with your bass from Roadworthy.
Yeah.
And then as the producer just gave it to me and said, "This is the one that you're going to play in the studio with us." I was just like, "Okay, great." And it just had some real mojo to it.
Yeah.
And Jake still plays it, you know. Through my connection with the Boatmen, I play a jazz bass now because of course they're the best basses available. But my bass is a jazz bass, and Jake borrowed my jazz bass a few times to play with the Boatmen. But honestly, that bass was a big shape of the sound that got us all the attention. That, you know, I'm certain if I would have used the Rickenbacker, most people wouldn't have cared. But it needed to have that. You know, I mean, Jim was right. Jim's got ears. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, it's I will always regret letting that bass slide through my hands, but I think that bass itself has done some really cool stuff, and it wouldn't.
I think Jake Smith has put a lot of legacy on it too. I mean, Jake has been playing that bass with the Boatmen for 25 years or something like that. So, you know, it's on stages all the time. I love it. It's a good instrument. You should regret it. I hope that one day you replace it with something equally as meaningful.
I hope so too. Hey, PJ, I'm running out of time, but it has been amazing to talk to you. And
so good to talk to you, Mike.
Really appreciate this. But thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Mike. Good to see you.
Good to see you. We'll talk soon, okay?
And that was my conversation with PJ Christie. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Down in Bloomington. If you have enjoyed it, I hope you tell your friends to listen to it. You can find Down in Bloomington on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, and you can find it anywhere where you download and listen to your favorite podcasts. Again, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again next time. Some sort of clever tagline goes here, but I don't have one yet.